I'm Carol Buchanan, and welcome to Public Transportation and Disability Etiquette. I'm the Director of Programs at the Denver Regional Mobility and Access Council, I guess more fondly known as Dr. Mac. And today we are partnering with the Rocky Mountain ADA Center to bring you this virtual training. I know that you have all signed in, but I'd like to take just a few minutes to quickly let you introduce yourselves because I want our presenter to know who all's with us today. So I'll try to call on everyone, and if you could just say who you are, where you're from, and what your role is. So I'm gonna go ahead and start with Jenny Loveridge.
Hello, I am Jenny Loveridge. I checked the last time I looked. I am from Commerce City. I am a senior commissions. I'm an adult advisory for the Eagle Point Rec Center, and I'm also in the public safety. This is something good because I connect with a lot of seniors, and the etiquette would be great for me to teach somebody who is learning the public transportation. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. And then how about the guys from FD Transportation? Introduce yourselves.
Hello. Yes, this is Dialdin Ali. I am on the FD Transportation. I also work as a dispatcher and sometimes as a driver for transportation. And also there is other me want to attend this.
Hello everyone. My name is Amna Ibrahim, driver from FD.
Thank you. All right, then I've got looks like Tracy. And,
yes.
And if you're not talking, if you could mute yourselves.
Yeah, I am Tracy Rogers, and I am a brand new volunteer with Douglas County Aging Resources. Just getting started.
Great, thank you. And Mike Pletch.
Hi, I'm Mike Pletch. I'm the board of directors for Dr. Mac as well as Ego Car Share.
All right, and Diane Cassiano.
Hello, I'm with the Free Ride Transit here in Breckenridge, Colorado. Besides supervising the drivers, I also conduct the PASS training here, which is the ADA piece.
And Patrick Kavanaugh.
Yeah, I'm Patrick. I'm a student at DU, but I'm an intern at Dr. Mac, and I'm a student in the social work program.
And Katie Muller.
Hi, I am Katie, and I am a social work student at MSU, and I'm also an intern at Dr. Mac.
Jillian Schell.
Not muted. Okay, I'm Jillian, and I am the transportation manager over at Aging Resources of Douglas County.
Linda Sweetman. Linda, do you want to introduce yourself? Linda Sweetman.
I forgot to unmute, sorry. I'm retired, and I actually am a volunteer driver in the Castle Rock area.
Thanks. Chris Sills.
I'm with RTD. I'm the Paratransit Safety and Training Compliance Officer for the Access Ride operation.
And then Darby.
Hi, I am a volunteer for Aging Resources with Douglas County. I've been with them a little over 2 years.
Thanks. Lori Glower.
Hi, I'm Lori Glower with Aging Resources of Douglas County. I'm the Community Engagement Director.
And Kelsey.
sorry about that. Someone just walked in. I'm Kelsey Thiessen with Aging Resources of Douglas County. We've got our volunteer transportation program, and then we've got a couple wheelchair accessible vehicles as well.
Thanks. Tara down at Mountain Metro.
Hi, I'm Tara Evans with Mountain Metro Transit, and I work in compliance for both the fixed route and the paratransit contract. So I just like to know when I'm watching those random compliance checks, if they're using proper etiquette.
Ann Grove.
I'm Ann Grove. I'm a volunteer driver with Douglas County Resources. I am currently inactive, protecting my health.
And Shiloh?
Hi, I'm Shiloh with Aging Resources, and I'm the office manager, but I do some driving too.
Bill Toll. How? Please tell me how to say it.
Okay, you got it right the first time. I'm Bill Toll with All Points Transit. We're a nonprofit in Montrose.
And Jeffrey Eby.
Hi, I'm Jeffrey Eby. I'm with Aging Resources Douglas County. I've been a driver for quite a while now.
Thanks. And Lindsay Alicon.
I'm Lindsay. I do safety communications and community engagement for RTD.
Ayana.
Hi, I am a community planner with the FTA, and I'm also a master's student at CU Denver in urban planning.
Jennifer Hussey. All right. Jennifer, can you hear me or? Well, I know Jennifer. She's the manager of Broomfield Easy Ride. And I have a phone number here. I'm not sure who it is at last 4 digits 5858. All right. Oh. And Hank Martin, I think I missed you.
Hank Martin. I'm the executive director of Neighbor to Neighbor, the Shafe Shuttle here in Salida, Colorado. It's beautiful here today.
I bet. All right. Well, I think, did I miss anybody? All right. Well, let's keep moving because we got, like I said, we got a lot to cover. Just want to give you a quick overview of what we're going to do today. We've done our welcome and our introductions. I'm going to give you a little bit of information about Dr. Mack and introduce a tool we're going to use during the presentation. And then I'm going to turn it over to our presenter, Jenny DeVries from Rocky Mountain ADA Center. And then we'll have some wrap up and evaluation. For those of you who don't know us, Dr. Mack is the Regional Coordinating Council for the Denver metro area. We are working with transportation partners to improve access to transportation and increase capacity for transportation and provide information about transportation. We have a monthly meeting on the first Tuesday of every month, and it's different every month. Our next meeting will be Tuesday, November 3rd. It's our member meeting, and we're actually going to be kind of having a member recruitment type month. So invite a friend or bring a colleague or invite another organization, or if you've never participated in a Dr. Mack meeting before and just want to try us out, reach out to me and I'll make sure you are invited. Also, during this time of COVID, there have been lots of changes in what transportation providers are actually able to do. So if you want the most up-to-date information about transportation resources in our area, you can go to our homepage. Right there on the front page, you can see what's current among our providers and what they're able to do. We also have a transportation guide. If you are interested in our hard copy of our transportation guide, reach out to me. We are happy to give you those. We are also in the process of developing a phone app that will help people find transportation resources. If you would like a demo or a training on how to use their app, again, reach out to me and I'll put you in touch with one of my colleagues who can try to make that happen for you. And then finally, our newest program is our Metro Area Travel Training Program, known as MAT, where we're working with organizations that serve immigrants and refugees to help them learn how to use public transportation. If you're interested in that, again, just contact me and I'll link you up with my coworker who can help you make that happen. You'll see our website and my contact information there, and I'll also put my contact information in the chat. I mentioned earlier that we're going to be using a tool today called Menti. Menti is, you can access it through your phone or by opening another window on your computer. I think most people find it easier just to use your smartphone if you have one. And you go to menti.com. And once you get there, you type in this code 520526. And if you want to go ahead and do that, go to menti.com and type in the code. We'll do a practice question. And then you can just keep that open and keep it there throughout the presentation. And Jenny's going to use it a little bit further down in the presentation. But I'll move over to Menti and we can take a look at that together. Go. So I've asked everybody, we're doing this practice question. What is your favorite Halloween candy? And we can find out. Let's see what most people like. This particular answer is going to come up like a word cloud, but some of the other questions will have different formats. So I asked this question yesterday in another meeting, and candy corn was the most popular answer. And I was kind of surprised because I usually find Reese's peanut butter cups are everybody's favorite, but I guess when it comes to Halloween, candy corn is king, I guess. Has everybody? Yeah, there you go. Tootsie Rolls are big, huh? But still. I just had no idea that candy corn was, I guess it makes sense. It's only available certain times, or a lot of everything else you can get throughout the year. So you get a sense of how this is going to work. Just keep Menti open on your phone or in a separate window on your computer. And when Jenny gets to that point in presentation, we'll move back over to Menti and she'll ask you to answer a few questions. All right. Great. Well, so now I'm going to go ahead and turn it on over to Jenny. I'm going to stop my screen and give her a chance to take the wheel.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Happy Tuesday. Had to practice that one because I definitely thought it was a Monday, Wednesday kind of vibe. But I just wanted to say thank you again to Carol for having me today. I'm very excited to be bringing this presentation to you all to talk about the relationship between disability etiquette and public transportation. So for maximum accessibility for anyone who might be dialing in or who isn't able to read some smaller fonts, I'll go ahead and read each slide through. And if there's any extra information, I'll make sure to have that at the end. And this meeting is recorded in case anyone is wanting to get that information at the end. So the Rocky Mountain ADA Center has both information, materials, and technical assistance, and they're all intended solely as informal guidance and are neither a determination of your legal rights or responsibilities under the ADA, nor binding on any agency with enforcement responsibility under the ADA. And our center is operated by Meeting the Challenge Incorporated. It's an ADA accessibility firm. So if you're looking to have an audit of your city for ADA compliance, you're doing self-transition plan or self-evaluation and transition plans, I can get you connected with them. And we're funded through a grant from NIDLR, which stands for the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living and Rehabilitation Research. And it allows us to provide technical assistance, training, and materials to the Rocky Mountain region, which is Colorado, Utah, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wyoming on the Americans with Disabilities Act. So if you do want to get in touch with our centers, the number that you're going to call is 1-800-949-4232. And depending on if you have an area code from out of state, it might actually send you to one of our other 10 centers. But rest assured that we'll be able to get that information to you regardless of where you're calling from. So that technical assistance number is there for if you're wondering about your responsibilities under the ADA, you're wondering what your rights are under the ADA, basically anything related to that topic, we can help get an answer for you. And if we can't, we have a really strong referral network, so we can get you in touch with contacts at the Department of Justice, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, your local ADA coordinator, and make sure that you get the resources and the answers that you need. We also conduct research. So one of the studies we completed most recently was medical marijuana in the workplace. Of course, it was legalized at the state level, but it's illegal federally. So we're here to help kind of interpret those laws for employers with disabilities who might be using marijuana to medicate. And of course, just like what we're doing today, we provide training. So in addition to trainings like this one where we can make it industry specific, we also offer trainings on service animals, state and local governments. So if it sounds like something you could use for your organization, my contact information will be available at the end of this presentation. We also publish and share materials. So we have service animal posters if you have a no pets policy but want to perhaps on your bus explain what exactly a service animal is and why they're allowed. We can always send that to you. And we also have a very strong presence on social media. You'll find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Pinterest. And so the number of learning objectives we want to accomplish today are to answer the questions: who has responsibilities under the ADA, who has rights under the ADA, what is the ADA really about, what does it say about service animals, and its relationship with other laws. And of course, I want you guys to get the most out of this training. And while I do have a lot of information for you, I often find that if you can use your personal experience or you have a question based on personal experience, peer-to-peer learning can be so much more impactful, and you'll always have this information available for the future. So please use the chat, raise your hand, what have you, and I'll be checking in on the chat every so often, in addition to having some chat opportunities, both where I ask you questions and, as Carol mentioned, with Menti. So lots of opportunities to engage and ask questions. So don't be afraid to speak up if you have one. Before we really dive into it though, an important question to answer is why access matters in the first place. And the reason that we say it's important is because you can acquire the identity of having a disability at any point in your life. You know, God forbid an accident happens, but also as we age, we commonly develop disabilities in terms of hearing, vision, or even mobility. So for that reason alone, you know, disability doesn't discriminate. So it's going to be the largest minority group both in the United States and in the world. And yet, in spite of how big that group is, it's probably actually lower than what's being reported. And that's for a number of reasons. The first being that it may conflict with other identities. So you might be a mom first and not want to identify with your bipolar disorder for a number of reasons. Perhaps you're worried about stereotypes associated with your disability, or you don't want to disclose in the workplace because you might be discriminated against. And then if we take that to healthcare, depending on if you're underdiagnosed or you have some sort of misdiagnosis, it could lead to disability not taking a front part in your life and choosing not to disclose it for a number of reasons. So just to kind of break down the populations in America, there are 57 million people in the United States who have a disability, which accounts for 22.5% of the population. So 8.1 million people have difficulty seeing, 2 million are blind or are unable to see, 7.6 million experience difficulty hearing, 31 million people have difficulty walking or climbing the stairs. And then translating that to Colorado, I do know we have some people from out of the region, so I can always get you those statistics if you're curious. But 847,000 Coloradoans have a disability, and it falls slightly under the national average at 21% of our population. 368,000 have a cognitive or learning disability, 123,000 are blind or low vision, 188,000 experience difficulty hearing, and 384,000 have difficulty walking or climbing stairs. Now, I'm sure a lot of us can agree that people with disabilities deserve the same, abilities to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's what our country was founded on. And yet, in spite of what we can all agree on, unfortunately, that's just not the reality. If we're looking at this slide that's breaking it down by the numbers, I'm not going to read the whole thing. But there is a pretty large difference between employment, educational attainment, household income for people with disabilities versus people without disabilities. And so the purpose of Etiquette is to help us understand and expand our awareness about disability in the first place, and also understand how attitudes can be their own barrier beyond just steps to a building with no ramp. And we will continue to dive into that, but these are some important numbers that I thought would be that you would appreciate, in that a third of people with disabilities are employed compared to more than double that of people without disabilities. And when it comes to educational attainment, more people with disabilities do not graduate high school. More people with disabilities only graduate high school, and then we see it flipped, that more people without disabilities attain a bachelor's or higher. So this is what we're all working towards, is equality, so we can see these numbers start to even out together. So the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, is a comprehensive civil rights law that prohibits the discrimination on the basis of disability. And this was its own law because during the civil rights movement, there was prohibiting discrimination on the basis of race, sex, religion, but notably disability was not one of those groups that was protected. And so this is where the ADA came in. When they created this law, they separated it into a number of different sections, 5 sections to be specific. The first one, Title I, refers to employment. So all phases of employment, whether it's you're posting a job application, you're hiring someone, firing someone, benefits, any of those will all fall under Title I. Title II of the ADA was state and local governments and their agencies. Title III of the ADA is private businesses. And then Title IV was telecommunications, and Title V was miscellaneous provisions. We're not going to cover that today, but something important to note is that religious entities and private clubs often do not fall under a lot of these ADA requirements. So understanding who has and who doesn't have a disability is often a difficult subject to tackle when we're trying to figure out who has responsibilities to serve this population. So some important things to note is there's no disability registry. There are no doctors who certify someone as disabled. There are no cards that someone has to carry, and the Social Security Administration doesn't certify someone as disabled. However, what we do have with the ADA are definitions. So the ADA protects the rights of people who have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits their ability to perform one or more major life activity. I do this presentation all the time and you still hear me stumble. So, in addition to what we consider the obvious idea of disability, whether it's obvious or not, there's a second group that the ADA protects, and it's for anyone who has a record of a substantial impairment or someone who's regarded as having an impairment. So just kind of diving into that a little bit, having a record of an impairment is something like cancer. While it may be in remission, it's very possible that you could still be discriminated against in employment, for instance. People don't want to hire you because what if it comes back? And if you're regarded as having an impairment, an example I like to give is someone is applying for a secretary position, but she has a lot of facial scarring and isn't admitted throughout the employment process because people perceive her as having a disability, and that's the only thing that's restrictive is their attitudes. And so the ADA is there to help establish equal access. And then also for the third part of who the ADA protects is to anyone whose disability can be mitigated. So if you have diabetes and you take medication to regulate blood sugar, you're still protected even though your body is no longer substantially limited in its ability to create sugar in its bloodstream. And then finally, the ADA does not apply to people whose impairment is unsubstantial. So this includes glasses, standard deviations in height or weight, just normal differences in the human population would not be considered a disability. It has to be substantially limiting their ability to perform a major life activity. And to be quite honest, it might be subjective. What might be substantially limiting to one person may not be to another. So it's just something to keep in mind as we move along. So an example of impairments on a major life activity, it could be deafness, partial or complete missing limbs, so amputations, cancer, someone with epilepsy, muscular dystrophy, PTSD, blindness, mobility impairments, cerebral palsy, HIV infections, major depressive disorder, schizophrenia, intellectual disability, autism, diabetes, multiple sclerosis, and bipolar disorder. Of course, some of these, like someone who has had an amputation, that'll be more obvious, but we're still considering the people with invisible disabilities like epilepsy or like diabetes where we're not sure that they have one, but we still want to make sure that they're getting that equal access that the ADA is there to establish. So just kind of a reminder of the definition of disability. It's anyone who has a physical or mental impairment substantially limiting a major life activity. And if a person meets the definition of a disability, they have rights under the ADA, but it doesn't mean that they have to exercise those rights. And it is important to note, just like we might not know exactly what to do when we're pulled over at by the police or something, we might not know all of our rights. The same goes for people with disabilities. They might not know that they have rights under the ADA. And so when you're interacting with these populations, it's really important to understand what their rights are so you can let them know, you know, this is okay, or it sounds like you experienced discrimination. Let's help you get through this, something along those lines. So the fundamental purpose of the ADA is equal treatment. It's not here to guarantee equal opportunity. So while it is there to make sure that everyone has access to vote, if you can't wait in line, it's not going to let you skip to the front of the line. It'll just make sure that you have a chair to sit in and to hold your place in line while you're at the polling place. And of course, people with disabilities may not be treated in a different or inferior manner, and integration of people with disabilities into the mainstream of American life is a fundamental purpose of the ADA. So whether it's a program or a service or an activity that's being offered, people with disabilities need to be integrated into all of those to the maximum extent possible. So the ADA prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability by public entities and places of public accommodation. So, you know, ADA lingo, Title II is public entities. Title III is public accommodations, which is businesses or nonprofits. And of course, there are rules with the ADA, but at its heart, we're trying to establish equal treatment for everyone, regardless of their background. And the rules that are in place are there because people without disabilities don't always know how to make the world accessible. So we're all here to work towards that together. And again, it can be overwhelming at times just because we haven't been trained to talk about disability. So if anything makes you uncomfortable, that's okay. I was uncomfortable learning about some of these topics, and then I realized that was just the way that I was raised. And so we're here to kind of remove the taboo about disability. So the ADA provides guidance, understanding, and minimum standards of accessibility. So it's the rules that everyone can learn to make sure that they at least have a minimum level of accessibility. And obviously the ADA is going to let people go above and beyond when it comes to protecting people with disabilities. Case in point, Colorado has chosen to protect service animals in training, but the ADA does not protect service animals in training. So it's up to states to decide how they want to go about this, but there is a minimum standard that they can go above and beyond. So we're gonna have this fun little video as an introduction to the disability etiquette fundamentals. Make sure that your volume's up and let me know if you can't hear it.
Good morning, Bob. Good morning there. Hey, man. Morning, Alice!
There's no need to be awkward. Poor Bob. Like so many of us, he just doesn't know how to interact with people with disabilities.
It's pretty easy, really. People with disabilities are people first.
We need the same things that every person needs, like respect.
Good morning, everyone.
Attention!
Okay. Maybe we need to be more specific.
The easiest way to show respect is to focus on the person, not the disability. It's okay. You'll get the hang of it.
One easy way to focus on the person is to watch the person signing and not their interpreter.
Or their companion.
It's really cool that you'd like to help, but do us both a favor and please ask me first. What you think might be helping?
I got you.
Wait, ah! Oh no, might actually not.
If you'd like to offer me help, let me hold on to your elbow. Don't take mine.
Hey, would you like to take my arm?
Sure.
Assistive devices help us to live our lives. They're really important and really personal.
Grabbing them only makes it weird for everyone.
What? Please only touch our devices and service animals if we've given you permission. And don't take it personally if I ask you not to. Remember that my service animal helps me all the time. Neither of us would like it if we were separated.
Remember, we make our own decisions. We sign documents, vote, volunteer, work, and pay taxes.
We get married.
So don't address me just because I have a quick smile.
Just because I'm blind. May I help you? Does not mean I'm deaf.
I don't know. I think he said he was gonna come, but...
Just because I'm deaf doesn't mean I'm blind.
And just because I use a wheelchair doesn't mean that I can't sweep you off your feet.
So take a deep breath, relax. We don't bite.
Unless we're really hungry.
Hello there, ladies. How are you?
Hello. And if you're not sure what to do, just ask.
Hi, would you still like to see a menu?
No thanks, but can you please read it to me?
Sure, definitely.
Just treat us the way you would want to be treated, and we'll all be okay.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, Alice.
Morning.
awkward no more. Nice job, Bob. Go forth and be human.
There's no need to be awkward.
And good luck getting that little jingle out of your head. It gets me every time. Nope, we already saw that one. Okay, so, in addition to the fundamentals that that video taught, if there's anything that you guys can take away from this portion of the presentation, it's these fundamentals. So the first is just focusing on individuality. Disabled people are people first. So instead of wondering how someone in a wheelchair gets around in the city, maybe you guys can both bond over the fact that shooting the gap right now is a headache, no matter if we're in COVID or not. And then after you establish what you have in common, then you can move on to more of those specific questions. Have patience. We all are entitled to our bad days and things like that. And sometimes, as we'll learn later, sometimes patience is just a really great thing to add liberally to whatever interactions you have, both with people with disabilities and just with the public in general. Something you'll hear a lot during this presentation also is ask, don't assume. To treat people with respect and dignity, and most particularly to treat them with the platinum rule. I'm sure many of you know what the golden rule is, at least, which is treat others how you would like to be treated. However, the platinum rule, oops, sorry about that. The platinum rule says to treat others the way that you would like, wow, I promise I know this one. The platinum rule is to treat others the way that they want to be treated. Easy for me to say. And the reason that we teach people the platinum rule is because we may not ever know what it's like to live life in a wheelchair. So what we think is the best for someone in a wheelchair might not actually be so. And so that's where the ask, don't assume comes in. So it's okay to ask how you can help someone. It's okay to notice if they're struggling and see if they need help. But the assumptions that they may need help might be unfounded. So that's where we're asking first. So we're going to kind of dive into specific disability groups and best forms of etiquette for each of them. So if you're interacting with someone who has a mobility or physical disability, speak directly to that person, whether it's kneeling, getting in a chair, or taking a step back so they don't have to cran their neck, just as long as you're on their level. Ask if they would like assistance, similarly to if you didn't want to normally push a coworker through the door, you might not want to push someone in a wheelchair through the door unless they're requesting that help. No touching or moving mobility devices without permission. Keeping ramps and paths clear. This is really important as we come through the holiday season, whether it's decorating with pumpkins or come the snowfall season, making sure that the entrances into your buildings are accessible. The ADA understands we can't control inches of snow in one point, but as long as you're making that effort to make sure your building is accessible, that's what's important. Noting the nearest accessible features, especially your accessible entrances. If someone calls ahead and you send them to the wrong entrance of the building, you're about to encounter a probably frustrated person when they find the correct entrance. So whether it's restrooms, bathrooms, just making sure you're noticing where the accessible features are. And if you do have to refer to someone by their disability, avoid terms like wheelchair bound, confined to a wheelchair, handicapped. As we saw with that video, these mobility devices are what allow people freedom to explore the world, and it's what enables them to be independent. So by no means do they feel like they're bound to a wheelchair. Handicapped is another term that's definitely fallen out of favor. It's something I used to hear, but we're trying to move past that. And so when you're talking about accessible parking or accessible restrooms, we're focusing on the ability instead of the limitation. And finally, if you have to refer to someone by their disability, you can say wheelchair user, person in a wheelchair, anything like that is fine. If you're interacting with someone who is blind, low vision, or just has some sort of visual disability, they face their own kind of assumptions, one being Braille. Of course, we want to have accessible materials in Braille, it sounds great, but it's a really hard language to learn and not everyone can read it even though they're blind. Another assumption is blindness is just complete blackness. But blindness can include glaucoma, someone with tunnel vision, or just peripheral vision, or something in between. It's not just completely black for everyone. And then, as we see with this picture here, only 2% of this population uses a cane. Otherwise, they're using dogs or a personal guide or even a technical guide. And so if you are interacting with someone from this group, just get their attention first and speak directly to them. Identify yourself when you enter a room or group, and obviously announce your departure. You don't want someone just talking to an empty room if they didn't know everyone left. You can always offer to read information or if they need a guide. This can be really helpful if someone will be coming into your facility or using your transportation, making sure that they know where all the important locations are, and giving them specific directions. So instead of saying, you know, go ahead and turn at the Starbucks at the end of the street, knowing that the end of the street is 400 feet, turning left there. So you're giving specific directions, keeping walkways clear of obstruction, ask if they need assistance, and then avoiding terms like visually impaired. Of course, someone with this disability doesn't see it as an impairment. They're just going to see it as part of their life. So if you have to refer to someone by their disability, you can say blind, you can say low vision, and if you don't know what it is, you can just say that person with a visual disability. All of those are totally okay to say. For the deaf, hard of hearing, or auditory disability group, there's some interesting things to know. The first being that deaf culture, it has its own language, values, beliefs, norms, behaviors, music, poetry, and it's a very tight-knit group, and it's because they all bond over the fact that they don't see being deaf as something to be embarrassed or sad or mad about. It's a celebration of welcoming someone into this community and sharing an entire culture with them. And in spite of that common language, there is no universal sign language. So we've heard of American Sign Language, but there's Dutch, South African, Chinese, and then there are also different dialects. So just like we have a Texan accent compared to a Boston accent, it can be very similar for sign language as well. And in addition to ways that people communicate, there are also hearing aids or cochlear implants. And cochlear implants are kind of a sticky point for people in deaf culture because, like I said, they don't see it as something that needs to be fixed. And when parents have that surgical procedure done on their child, usually is the case, a cochlear implant is connected to the brain so that the brain can start to register sounds and things like that. And it can be really great, but people with cochlear implants, while they may be deaf without them, are not included in deaf culture. And often with hearing aids or people with cochlear implants, they rely a lot on lip reading. So they might not know sign language, but they are going to rely on that. So if you're interacting with anyone with these disabilities, speak directly and clearly to the person. So avoid chewing gum or covering your mouth. Obviously, a hard one for COVID right now is wearing a mask. And so that's going to be a real challenge or a barrier if someone's relying on this. So we can recommend masks with the clear, sorry, our phone calls, they just come through the office. I hope it's not too distracting. But if that is the case, or regardless of the situation, ask how they would like to communicate. It's going to depend on the length and complexity. It could be something as simple as writing down and exchanging notes on paper, but if it's going to be technical information, it might be on you as a government entity to provide interpreters or something like that. So just be prepared to offer different communication options depending on that complexity. And as we saw with the video, don't try and tell the interpreter to tell them something, because the interpreter will literally say, Jenny said to tell you this, instead of just like a normal back and forth conversation. Another tip for this, if someone's calling with an interpreter, they might say their name is Paul, but it's a woman's voice, and you're like, hold up a second, I know what's going on here. It's probably just an interpreter. They might identify themselves as such, so try not to hang up on them or anything like that. Another suggestion is to not shout or dismiss with never mind. You know, communication is never a given. So when you are communicating with someone, saying never mind just kind of dismisses them and says, you know, this conversation isn't important to me, but it might be important to them. So just something to keep in mind. And same with vision impaired, don't say hearing impaired. If they're deaf, say it. Hard of hearing, that's okay. If they just have an auditory disability, that's cool too. For people with communication disabilities, so this can include, you know, someone who's deaf. They might not know exactly, they can read lips, they know what words are coming out of the mouth, but they might say it weird. Or someone who's had a stroke, someone with Tourette's, a stutter, really just any sort of communication disability. If you are interacting with them, give them your full attention. Don't interrupt or finish their sentence. This might be hard for us to stop because we want to help them get to the point. But with someone with Tourette's or a stutter, they might have to get that word or that phrase out before moving on. So this is where that patience comes in, giving them a chance to repeat themselves if need be. And always, if they do repeat it, make sure that you're responding back with verification just to make sure you're on the same page. If that's still not working, try removing yourself and changing the conversation to a quiet environment. And if you still can't understand, suggest an alternative method of communication, whether it's, can I get my supervisor? Can we put this in an email? Again, handwritten notes, or, you know, perhaps it's something really technical and you'll need an interpreter or you'll need accessible materials. Just some things to consider. So for the group who falls under cognitive, psychiatric, developmental, or an intellectual disability, obviously this is a big group. For anyone that knows anything about disability, this is a huge spectrum. So it can include someone with autism, Down syndrome, to someone with ADHD. So these are just general guidelines. The first being, be calm and patient and listen carefully. Especially with certain disabilities within this category, perhaps it takes a little bit longer for them to process. So give them the benefit of the doubt and give them time to respond. And if it's gone a little bit, then you can repeat your question. Again, speak directly to the person and not their companion. Of course, you can have a conversation if the companion's with them on the bus, they're spacing out the window and the companion talks to you. That's totally okay. But try not to assume that the companion speaks for that person with a disability. Use visuals when explaining complex information. This can be really important in terms of, you know, educating them on emergencies, where they need to look, what signs they should be looking for, exits, things like that. Speak clearly and concisely. Rephrase metaphors or terminology. This is something that I have to recommend to a lot of younger people because there's just so much colloquialisms. I mean, even talking to my brother who's in college with his friends, they can just string words together in a sentence and I have no idea what they just said. So if you know that you use short phrases of turn or something like that, just make sure that you're rephrasing it. Hit them with those summary questions again, making sure you're on the same page. And then, of course, trying to avoid words like crazy, insane, lunatic, hysterical, lower high functioning. I've heard lower high functioning often, especially when I was in school. That's just something that's fallen out of favor. Autism is not really considered on that lower high functioning spectrum anymore. And that's because it's kind of associated with some problematic issues. But, you know, with the other ones, just think about if you happen to overhear, you've had a really bad day, you might have a learning disability and you tried to get directions from someone and they were like that crazy person over there. Just trying to remember the impact of what our words have, even if we think someone can't hear them or doesn't understand them. So for people of short stature, there are over 200 diagnosed types of growth-related disorders that can cause dwarfism, and they face their own kinds of stereotypes, most notably being childlike or small. And regardless of that, they still count on being able to use equipment at their height. So whether it's service counters, credit card readers, important materials that need to be signed, they're still going to assume that they're going to be these resources are accessible to them. Similar to people in wheelchairs, make sure to just get on their level, find a seat, that should be fine. And then when it comes to, you know, the ADA requirements of lower telephones, bank counters, urinals, water fountains, etc., a good example that I can give is, for instance, like at a hotel, they're required to have a number of ADA accessible rooms. But, excuse me, if there are 100 rooms and 99 of them are booked, and the last one is they've held off for someone in case has a disability and wants to be at their hotel, but the next person to call doesn't have a disability, they can book that room. Once again, it's the ADA requiring equal opportunity, but not guaranteeing equal outcome. So you can wait till the last restroom is the accessible one. And if no one in front of you has a disability, go ahead and use it. Don't worry about that kind of stuff, but do make sure you're holding it off until the last possible opportunity. It's okay to refer to these people as dwarf, little person, or person of short stature. However, according to my research, midget is not considered acceptable. And of course, if someone were to email me and let me know like, hey, like that's not okay anymore, I'd have to update this presentation accordingly. So as I continue along this presentation, someone might call you guys out on something that I taught you saying it was okay and they say it's not. That's just something to keep in mind. You know, language changes, disability might change, and so it's just adopting a more flexible vocabulary, basically. For service animal users, if you are interacting with someone who has an animal, speak directly to the handler and not the good boy. Don't touch the animal without permission. Some animals in training might have a vest that says like, please pet me, I'm trying to be socialized. That's totally okay. Just again, ask, don't assume that just because it's there, it's allowing someone to do so. Don't distract the animal or interfere with its work. Colorado has chosen to make that a class 3 misdemeanor, I believe, if you're interrupting a service animal handler team. So just some things to keep in mind. Of course, inform the handler if the animal approaches you. It might have been trained to do that. Maybe it's a dog for epilepsy and it's been trained to get help in case of a seizure. So return lost animals to their owners, even if they're in training, perhaps they got off leash. Don't assume service animals have bad lives. This is a pretty common assumption, but if you think about it, people with service animals, these dogs are getting to go out with their owner all day, get to see new sights, smell new smells. So to me, I mean, they're probably out in the world more than I am sitting at my desk 8 hours a day. So another assumption is that sleeping animals are off duty. This is mostly false, because if an animal is sleeping, it just means that it's relaxing and resting up for the chance that its handler needs them. And that would just be the sign of a good dog compared to a dog that's barking all the time and being very disruptive, and just treating the handler with common courtesy. So service animals are one that we get a lot of questions on, so I'm just going to dive in a little bit more with them. So some do's and don'ts according to the ADA: when their disability is not apparent, the public entity can ask 2 questions, and it should be both questions. So the first is the animal required because of a disability? And that'll be a yes or no, not what is your disability, not prove your disability, nothing like that. It's a yes or no question. And then what work or task has the animal been trained to do? Not prove it, not I don't believe you, not give me certification, or where's its vest, or anything like that. None of those are required. The only thing that's required of a service animal handler is that they answer those 2 questions. And again, the public entity may not ask or inquire about the nature or extent of an individual's disability. So service animals, they're considered medical equipment. So anywhere a wheelchair could go, or that you could take your diabetes medication, that's the same thing for service animals. So the ADA doesn't restrict breeds of dogs that can be used as service animals. It doesn't It doesn't restrict weight or height or anything like that. And public entities do have the right to determine on a case-by-case basis whether the use of a particular service animal poses a direct threat, and that has to be based on the animal's actual behavior or its history, not that it's a pit bull or a Rottweiler, or that a service animal in the past was disruptive. It has to be a case-by-case basis, and all surrounding the animal's actual behavior or history. Okay. So this is our first chance to use Menti. So once again, we're going to head to menti.com and use code 520526. Carol, I'll stop my share so we can head on over there.
Okay. Can everybody see that?
And these look like pretty great questions so far. I can go ahead and start answering them, Carol, if you're okay with that, while people continue to put some in.
Yep, sounds good.
So I'll just go left to right, wanting to understand their perspective. So, kind of with, that ask, don't assume tenant, it's very possible that you won't know that person's perspective on something until you ask them. And it's okay to ask, be like, listen, like say for instance, someone relies on lip reading and you're wondering what their perspective is on if they are struggling during COVID. It's okay to ask and acknowledge, are you struggling right now because of your disability? Is there anything that I can help you with? And you might be opening up, a world of answers to that question. It's possible that someone might want to talk a lot more about it than just related to what service you're offering. But it's going to be a really helpful thing if you can say, like, I want to help you. How can I help you? What if someone is allergic to a service animal? So we've had this question before. Often, if we're talking about transportation, perhaps someone is in an office requesting some sort of form, or they're on transportation. What we can do, or what we can suggest is, first of all, having a policy in place on how to accommodate if someone has a service animal on a bus, whether it's an allergy that's so severe that someone needs to book a different route or book a different time to come into the office. Those are all ways that we can do that. Another suggestion that I can make is the Job Accommodation Network. They have great suggestions on how to accommodate someone with an allergic disability and someone with a service animal. How can I
Jenny?
best? Oh, yes.
This is Carol. I was just gonna also say, I know when we did the service animal webinar back in the spring, we talked about this a lot too. And I think this also goes to, for transportation providers, doing a good job at the intake point. I know a lot of providers, if you're providing paratransit or if you're a volunteer driver program or whatever, and you're providing transportation to folks, you often do an intake or develop a profile of that person. And that's where that part of the job becomes really important, because then you can find out if somebody has allergies to dogs or whatever. And then maybe you don't put them in the same, when you're scheduling transportation, you don't put them on the same vehicles and that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Carol. I'm glad that you were able to explain that. Yes. And if anyone wants a full-on training on service animals, we had a really fun time in April. So don't be afraid to request that one. So let's see, we're moving around a lot. So how to communicate with the mask on. You know, it's not going to be easy, especially if you're hard of hearing and they're trying to understand what you're saying, speaking louder. If there's common issues, maybe providing a QR code that people can scan with their phone and they read instructions instead of you having to explain them. But you can always ask. Again, often people with these disabilities are learning the best ways and the best solutions to their problems. So if they're obviously struggling, be like, listen, I want to make sure you understand what's happening or you get the resources you need. What's the best way to communicate this to you? They'll be able to give you that answer and you don't have to research. You're going straight to the source. But if you do have specific questions, give us a call at that 1-800 number and we have often people calling with specific questions. I wish I knew more about how people self-identify. The vocabulary is very sensitive and subjective yet flexible. Yeah, I mean, that's a problem with even this training, is that I can tell you guys all of the different ways to refer to disability, but the best way is just going to ask that person. So if you have a relationship with them, you can ask their perspective and be like, listen, I know that you're in a wheelchair. If I have to refer to you by that, is it okay that I say the person in a wheelchair? Is that all right? Let's see. So, how can I best put a person with a disability at ease? We'll dive into that a lot with language. So trying to make sure that you're as open as possible. You're not saying handicapped, you're not saying retarded, even to just describe like something that's dumb. Just making sure that the language that you use is encompassing and respectful of other people. And then just letting them know, like, listen, if you have any struggles, come to me. Like, we're used to disability requests and I'd be happy to get this request sent along so you get what you need out of this service. How to approach a blind person and not scare them. That's a good one. If you're hoping to ask if they need some help or they need a guide, let them know that you're there. You're here to help, and you can like tap on their elbow or their arm and let them know like, hi, I'm here. Of course, in COVID, that might not be possible. So just kind of letting them know that you're in the room and that you're here to help if they need it. And if they need a guide, that you can work with them and give them instructions on how to get to certain places. Integrity is important when interacting with someone with a disability. Rarely do I ask questions about the disability, but I almost always offer any kind of assistance. That is such a great point. You know, I haven't had a chance to really dive into that, but yeah, someone else said I treat them with respect and dignity. Yeah, just the way that you would treat anyone. They want to be treated like a normal person. They don't want to be treated with special treatment. Sometimes it's even embarrassing that you're going out of your way to make sure this one person is okay when probably they're fine. So yeah, just treat them like you would any other person with respect and dignity. You guys should be the trainers at this point. That's a really great suggestion. Small.
I see this. Oh, you got it. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. Small public transportation accessibility, for example, Uber and Lyft. Yeah, so Uber and Lyft fall under Title III. And so service animals are still protected. They're allowed into all of those, but it does fall under a different title of the ADA. And so they are required to accommodate people with disabilities. That doesn't change regardless of what title it is. You still have to accommodate someone with a disability. But their rules are just slightly different. So like for effective communication, if someone requests an interpreter as a government entity, you have to provide an interpreter. But for a Title III, if it's a smaller business or something like that, if there's another way to have that effective communication that isn't an interpreter, they can choose that so it's not an undue hardship on their business or a burden on their business or anything like that. And if you do have more specific questions, definitely let me know and I'd be happy to answer them. I think I answered, did I cover all of them?
I think so.
Okay.
Should we move on to the next one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great questions so far, everyone, though. Thank you. Okay, so what do you do if a person with a disability has a service animal and wishes to come into your place of business, bus, office, etc.? So this is asking, you know, do you know the policies in place, or if you choose to be extra polite or something like that, what is your approach?
And you can be thinking about your bus or your vehicle or, yeah, if that helps.
You know, and this was a lot, definitely a little bit more of an easier question, but people saying let them in, they're welcome in any and all businesses. That's absolutely true. There are very slim exceptions to not allow service animals. And for the majority of you attending this presentation, the only times that you would say like we can't permit the service animal is if it's a direct threat to health or safety. So perhaps the animal is not trained properly and it peed in the corner of the office or something. You know, that would be considered a threat to the health of people in the office or something like that. So if you ever are in a situation where the animal is disruptive or a direct threat, or it's a fundamental alteration, I don't know a specific example for transportation, but say for instance, there's an offering of a public pool. That would be a fundamental alteration because it's meant for humans and not for dogs. So those are the slim exceptions to allowing service animals. But other great tips, asking if they need help with the door, accommodating them if they have a specific request, allowing them to enter, welcome them in. We're a transit agency, great. Welcome and treat just like anyone else. Allow them to enter and ask if they need help. Yep, that's great. For the bus, we train our operators to ask the 2 allowable questions. Nice, gold star. Many of the drivers don't ask at all, okay, because they don't want to deal with the hassle, and many people with disabilities have trouble articulating their answers. So those are 2 really great points. So there can be a no pets policy, but you can allow service animals. For one, sometimes they're just, the unfortunate reality is that people try to pass their pets off as service animals. And if you want to save yourself some headache and it's a well-behaved animal, then you can let them on without asking those 2 questions. And then, yes, just like your point says, people with disabilities may have trouble articulating their answers. Like I said earlier, just because someone with anxiety has an actual service dog doesn't mean that they know exactly what the animal has been trained to do, unless it's in case of an emergency. Because some animals were bought at a training service and they train the dog for your disability, but they might not know actually what the animal does. And that's a common answer, or they might not be able to explain it well. So just, again, treating people with respect and trying to get to the root of it if the animal is disruptive or anything like that is a really great point. That's a good answer. Thank you for chiming in, everybody. And I think those are the end of my Menti questions. Let's see.
Jenny, back over to you.
All righty. Okay. Share. So, there are some other quiz questions that will go down later, but that's where I'm hoping that we can use the chat instead of Menti, just because I'm such a Zoom girl and I'm so used to that. But thanks you guys for helping me be my first guinea pigs in my training, at least, of using Menti. So kind of like I alluded to, at the center we say that a choice of words is a choice of worlds. And that's because our language will determine our attitudes and perceptions of the world, for one, but two, the language that we use will determine people's attitudes and perceptions of us. So for that reason, we should try to focus on people's abilities versus limitations. So focusing on handicapped versus accessible parking or accessible restrooms just alerts someone to the fact that you have been trained in disability etiquette and you know the proper terminology for now. Accessible parking seems like it's here to stay, of course, but just trying to focus on, again, like you're having a conversation with someone, talking about what they're able to do instead of asking about what their disability limits them in life. Also understanding the connotation or the literal form of a word compared to the denotation or the figurative version of a word. Case in point, retarded. It does exist in the dictionary, and it's defined as basically like a slowed or delayed processing. But just because it is in existence doesn't mean that it hasn't been used to offend people with disabilities for a very long time. So there may be other words that have a different meaning to what you were trained or taught. So just keeping that in mind, focusing on empowering people versus belittling them. And then again, with the intent versus impact of your words. So you might be coming to someone with a disability with the best intentions. You're trying to help them and you're trying to use all of the right words and make sure that you don't offend them. But, we all make mistakes. We may all encounter at one point in our lives a situation where someone was very offended by what we said. And in that, we have to understand that the impact of our words has a lot of importance, just as with our intent. So just things to keep in mind. If that does happen, just thank them for the opportunity to learn and commit to them, that you'll continue to grow and that you'll take this lesson and use it for the future. So some realistic tips still within disability etiquette, the first being aware of accessible features, knowing where your accessible parking is, knowing if you have ramps, restrooms, benches, and being aware of accessible features like materials or technologies. If someone's requesting information in Braille, who are you going to go to if they need that? If they need assistive technology, who is your point person that knows more about the ADA that can get you that information or access to those technologies? So in the meantime, though, there are ways to make features accessible. So the first is offering a tour. If someone with a service animal is going to be coming in a lot, maybe letting them know areas that they should be aware of, or if someone is blind, knowing where the restrooms are, things like that. If your place just went through construction and everything changed, letting your routine customers know where the important places are. And service counter heights. Under the new standards of the ADA, you have to have accessible service counters for people in wheelchairs or those who are of short stature. But if you are in a facility that hasn't been updated recently, having something like a clipboard handy if the service counter is going to be too high to pass back and forth forms or pens or anything like that. Making sure that credit card or keypads are removable so that someone can swipe it from a different location. Knowing reach limits, perhaps someone in a wheelchair can't reach the ticketing counter or something like that. Being able to just be like, can I help you with that? Or what do you need from me can be very helpful. And finally, again, that clear path of travel. So if you are trying to make your materials more accessible, your font should be either Calibri or Times New Roman. It should be sentence case, so not all caps, not all lowercase, no matter how trendy it might be. Make sure that it's font 8 or size 18 or larger. Making sure that the color is white on black. And that the texture is matte. Glossy can create a lot of reflection that makes it harder for people to read. And the pictures need good contrast. So an example over here to the right, the words are obviously in all caps, it's cursive, and it's on top of a picture. So this is kind of like a what not to do. It might look cool to have text on top of an image, but it can be very confusing or hard to read for someone with a visual disability or a reading disability even. And so to wrap up this section, the lesson here is to seek to understand before expecting to be understood. Similar with the intent versus impact, we all want to communicate with people, we want to get our ideas across, but sometimes we might not know the real answer behind something. We might not know the impact of our words. And so if someone is trying to get you to understand something, just try to take a deep breath and take a second and accept that information before deciding whether it's ridiculous or silly or too much information at once. Can be just a great rule of thumb. All right, so now we're going to use the chat function. Just a quick quiz time. All you have to say is true or false, that eliminating barriers only helps people with disabilities. What do we think about that one? Yeah, a lot of people saying false, no. Yeah, great job, everyone. Yeah, absolutely. You know, when it comes to eliminating barriers, so eliminating barriers equals increasing accessibility. So when we install a ramp into our building, it's going to let a mom who's trying to push a baby carriage through the door get in just as easily. Or eliminating barriers in texting. So when we can enlarge text or Siri with the voice to text options, that was required under the ADA for accessibility, but I use Siri all the time when I'm driving and I don't want to text, I do voice to text. So when we work to eliminate barriers for people with disabilities, we're just increasing access for everyone. All right, true or false again. It's considered inappropriate to say "see you later" when talking to someone who is blind. What do we think about that one? Dang. Yeah, everything is subjective. Yeah, I was hoping to trick you guys up, but it appears that you already know your stuff. Yeah, no, you can absolutely say "see you later." If they have a sense of humor, they'll be like, "Oh, well, where will I see you?" But if you say it on accident or something like that, don't worry about it. It's fine. However, what if you're asking someone to go on a walk and they're in a wheelchair? Yeah, you might not know. Tara, I appreciate that. That's okay if you don't know. That's why we're here. Yeah, another trick question, just here to keep you guys on your toes. You can absolutely say that. These are all colloquialisms. They know that you don't mean literally like go for a walk. They're saying, let's go outside, enjoy the beautiful fall weather before fire season takes over again. So if someone's dog calms them down during an anxiety attack, does this qualify them as a service animal? Okay. Getting a lot of no's. We've got a yes. Not necessarily. Yes. More detail. Sure. Yeah. So a favorite thing of us to say at the center is it depends. But for this one, the answer would be yes. So an anxiety attack, this is on the basis that someone has a disability, which is anxiety, and it's substantially limiting a major life activity. And this major life activity would be just being able to be calm and interpret your world without anxious thoughts. And if your disability leads you to the point that your body is under attack, the service animal has been trained to calm them down. Now, if it's been trained, it will have been trained to do something like deep pressure therapy or force its head under the person's hand so that the person's petting them instead of hurting themselves or something like that. And so Tara made a great point. This is the difference between a service animal and an emotional support animal. So in this case, an emotional support animal is going to provide comfort regardless of their breed, regardless of training, that they're just cute and fuzzy, and it makes someone feel better. A service animal will have been trained specifically for this person's anxiety disorder to help them, to help mitigate their disability. So if you don't know, you can ask those two questions and just make sure that it's required because of a disability, in this case anxiety, and that it's been trained and ask them what work or task it's been trained to do. So they might say, you know, it's going to sit on my lap and put its head on my shoulder until I calm down. That would be training. But if they say, well, it hasn't been trained, it's just there to make me feel better, that's an emotional support animal. Last question, can a person have more than one service animal with them? Got a lot of yeses. Question mark, I don't know. Not sure, yes. Yeah. So in this case, yes, if someone has a guide dog because they're blind, but they also have a service animal that's been trained to help them with their anxiety, then in that case, yeah, absolutely, they can have more than one service animal. But those questions still are required to ask them if you need to, and then they also still have to be well behaved, trained, all of the above. Nice job, everyone. Thank you for participating. So now we're going to translate a lot of what we learned into transportation specific examples. So when it comes to operations and accessibility, it's really important to know that your policies, practices, and procedures are not either intentionally or unintentionally barring people from disabilities from using your services. And if they are, then you're going to have to make reasonable modifications to your policies, practices, and procedures to allow someone with a disability to enjoy the equal opportunity as someone without a disability has for any of those three policies, practices, or procedures. And kind of like we've already talked about, the passenger with a disability is probably the best source for what she needs, he needs, etc. And that's because they've lived with this disability their whole life. So they're used to common barriers, they're used to common questions, and so they'll probably know the cheapest, easiest accessible, or what have you option for this reasonable modification. And sometimes the most difficult barriers can be attitudes. So while you guys might be overwhelmed worrying about the same or the correct terms to use or what not to say. At the end of the day, as long as we've gone through this presentation and we know that these barriers exist and we try to eliminate them in our daily lives, that'll gradually have that butterfly effect and increase accessibility for people with disabilities. So buses in the town, they have to adhere to all aspects of Title II of the ADA. And in addition to that, the Department of Transportation has rules and directions in place for accessibility, and these were there long before the ADA came into law. We did celebrate the ADA's 30th anniversary, but these laws for accessibility for the DOT at least trace back even farther than that. And then through Title 49 refers to transportation and all rules for service animals. They're going to mirror the ADA with one exception, and we will get to that in a little bit. So if someone has a personal device or requires a service of a personal nature, it's important to know that the transportation provider is not going to be required to provide personal devices. So you don't have to require or provide a wheelchair if someone requests it. You don't have to provide power wheelchairs, canes, walkers, anything like that. And it also includes assistance in eating, going to the restroom, or dressing. Obviously, this is not going to be your responsibility. What these requests should be is to your programs, policies, or procedures that happen to be barring that person from accessing one of those. So the only minor difference for the Title 49 of service animals within the DOT says that any guide dog, signal dog, or other animal individually trained to work or perform tasks for an individual with a disability. So it's just a slight difference in wording when it comes to the ADA, but as long as you can ask those two questions, of course, federal law will supersede local law. So for instance, in Denver, they've banned pit bulls, but if a pit bull is a guide dog, signal dog, or other animal, it'll be protected federally in addition to being protected under this specific wording of the law. So using lifts and ramps, for individuals with disabilities who don't use a wheelchair, including someone who is standing, they should still be allowed to use the vehicle's lift or ramp. Again, when we're talking about mobility disabilities, they might have an invisible disability that would prevent them from being able to climb stairs easily, or perhaps a service animal in training just really struggles with a certain entrance of the bus. And, you know, obviously in that case, they're going to ask ahead of time perhaps, or let the driver know that they need a modification to that policy that everyone gets in on a certain entrance and exits out a certain way. And people who use wheelchairs, especially power chairs, often will have a preference for entering a lift platform in a particular direction. As we can see here, the woman's back is to the bus and she's facing away, but we can see it in other ways or in other directions as well. And it's just going to be based on a number of factors. If they've been practicing a certain direction, or perhaps they have another disability that would prevent them from accessing it the typical way. And just some things to keep in mind, of course, just asking them, you know, if they seem to be uncomfortable or they're struggling to access part of that bus, making sure that you're trained on how to use these accessible features. And then common for wheelchairs is the minimum extent of integration required under the ADA compared to the maximum extent. So making sure that when it comes to ADA standards on transportation, or at depots or at any of those locations that are all included in the transportation process, that they are accessible, because obviously someone who is traveling with a disability will expect the same access to a service as someone without a mobility disability or without a disability in general. There are some securement policies that are important to note. Also, how cute is that service dog in the picture? I love that. So the ADA does allow the provider to set policies on requiring or not securements. And again, it's far better to have a proactive policy that protects more people than a reactive or than a reaction to someone having an issue with the securement policy. So yeah, you can go above and beyond the ADA, and if someone does have an issue, it'll be a lot easier on you in terms of paperwork and first responding to an issue if you already have had that policy in place. And so you can suggest someone transferring to a seat, but just because you have a specific area for wheelchairs or you've marked off an area for service animal handlers, you can't require them to sit there. And that's for a number of reasons, but the ADA is there to make sure that there is a minimum standard for people to access these places that the public can go, but just because it's there doesn't mean they have to accept it. And if the passenger requests a wheelchair securement, it has to be done. And so, like I mentioned, with effective communication, it's incumbent on the Title II entity to modify that policy or practice or procedure according to the wishes of that person with their disability. And so with a wheelchair securement, that's not going to be an undue hardship. It's not going to be a fundamental alteration. And so if it doesn't meet any of those slim exceptions that I've mentioned before, then you're going to have to accommodate, or you're going to have to modify that for the person. And the driver will have to assist them if requested. Just remember, you know, they're not going to have to assist with any of those personal devices or services. But if it's anything relating to transportation or to your specific sphere that you're working within, you will have to assist that person. Of course, as I'm sure we all know, definitely do not secure the wheelchair or anything like that to the wheels or to the battery for obvious reasons. Wheels can move even if they're locked. The battery can lead to disastrous consequences. So avoid that for sure. Lap and shoulder belts should only be put in place if the passenger requests them. Of course, you don't have to have them for every single situation, but it's important that they're there in case someone needs them. And then of course the other exception is if you require all passengers to use seatbelts, then you definitely need all seatbelts available. And you can require someone with a disability to use a seatbelt if you require everyone to use a seatbelt. And so, you know, that's the ADA, it's going in and out in terms of, you know, what is allowed and what isn't allowed. But if you're requiring something of everyone, if you're requiring everyone to sign a form before they get on the bus, just because someone has a disability and they can't write, doesn't mean that they're exempted from that. Okay, so under Part 37 regulations, subpart G, you can find it under 37.173. This is the training requirement. So each public or private entity that operates a fixed route or demand responsive system shall, this is always a hard one for me, shall ensure that personnel are trained to proficiency. Sally sells seashells on the seashore. You say that 5 times fast. As appropriate to their duties so that they operate vehicles and equipment safely and properly assist and treat individuals with disabilities who use the service in a respectful and courteous way with appropriate attention to the differences among individuals with disabilities. So this is kind of what we're all trying to shoot towards, is making sure that the services that we offer are accessible to people with disabilities and that they feel comfortable using them. And so the easy way to do that is to just ask and not assume. And I know that this can be overwhelming. We've covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time. But when it comes to, providing the service in a respectful manner, if you're the leader of your organization and you're wondering, you know, like maybe my staff could use a refresher, it's far better to be proactive and train your staff again if it's been a couple years and remind them, you know, we are serving the entire public. Maybe you're serving specifically people with disabilities, and you can do an internal training. You don't have to ask us to do it. If you know that there are common issues with people with disabilities, common complaints, or certain barriers that you're always encountering, you can go ahead and be proactive about that, and not only train your staff, but also making sure that you let the groups that you serve know that we've received training on this, and we're reviewing our policies. We want to make sure that they're not discriminatory, and we're opening it up to public comment. I know that there are some committees being set up requesting specific input from people with disabilities, and that's great, because when we talk about accessibility, it has to be built in from the beginning, from the thought of a policy through the end. And often some policies or even buildings were built without accessibility in mind. And if you can request input from disability communities, one, it shows a good faith effort that you're making sure that they feel comfortable. And like I said, you're not going to recreate the wheel. You don't have to spend hours researching the best way to accommodate someone. If you're talking to, you know, the National Federation for the Deaf and Blind about common transportation barriers, they'll be able to like list off 10 things that they always encounter people calling in. And you can create those relationships with the community that can make your life a lot easier down the line. If, say for instance, someone tries to sue because of discrimination, you already have access to those communities, or you're in touch with those individuals that will say like, no, listen, they're doing their best. Here's what they have communicated with us about. Here's what they've already changed in terms of accessibility. And that's the real intent behind this, is making sure that you're releasing the stigma around disability, basically. And that comes with taboos, often with euphemisms. We will try and say, you know, that individual with who, I can't even come up with a bad example, but you know, we're not used to just calling disability for what it is. We try to tiptoe around it. And so hopefully when we're learning about disability, you guys become more comfortable with just using this vocabulary, because people will appreciate that you're trying your best, that you're having this training in place. So all of this to say that this training will help fall under this regulation, and you're satisfying these requirements by going through this training and implementing it in your location, wherever that is. So some suggestions regarding your policies that I can make. The first is being aware of the policies regarding modifying them, or modifying your practices or your procedures for people with disabilities. Good example, you might have a no pets policy. That's totally fine, but you'll have to modify it for someone with a service animal. Also understanding your transit provider responsibilities under Title II, so making sure that effective communication is established. So if they need an interpreter, making sure that that's there. If they want to bring their companion, making sure that that is accommodated. And then also understanding the rider's responsibilities for service animal handlers, that it has to be under control, and with effective communication or anything like that, if someone needs a resource, you have to be able to have those resources available, but you also won't be held, you know, responsible if someone doesn't request them. So, you know, for instance, if someone isn't speaking very much to you and they seem like they know what they're doing, but they happen to get off at the wrong route, you just have to make sure that you have had all the resources available to that person, and they knew about it ahead of time, so that if they say, I got lost and it's your fault, that you were like, well, actually, we have very clear bus routes printed. We have it audibly as the route is going along. They're presented in the depot or something like that. As long as you are being proactive and making sure that your service is accessible from the beginning, it should be accessible for anyone with a disability. So, just some things to remember. Just use common sense. Just try to remember how you would like to be treated with respect and dignity. And if, for instance, you do have a disability, how would you like to have your disability disclosed to someone within a transportation or at a place of business or anything like that? Just trying to put yourself in their shoes, knowing that that might not always be the most accurate, and you can always ask instead. And extend basic courtesies to all people, including those with disabilities. Be patient. It may take a person with a disability longer to get on and off the bus. And relax. People with disabilities are people first. Of course, we do like to say being a jerk is not counted as a disability, but just in general, sometimes this can get overwhelming, and just remembering to treat them as a person first and talking about their disability second will be just a really good place to go from there. And beyond that, there are a number of resources if you're looking to learn a little bit more about these topics. The first is the U.S. Department of Transportation, and that website, obviously, I'll have these slides available, and I'll make sure that Carol has them for after this training so you can access these resources. But the Department of Justice enforces Title II. So this is where transportation falls under in addition to the DOT. And so if you are looking for more information on that, you can find it at ada.gov. Of course, our center will serve as a free resource. So if you're looking to avoid training or consultations, we have online courses about service animals and etiquette and a lot of other topics. And we also have that TA line with specialists in the 2010 standards, even including transportation. We have experts in service animals and all of that. So we can get those answers for you if you're curious. The University of Kansas created a guideline for reporting and writing about people with disabilities. So if you're wondering, how do we talk about them when we're updating our policies or anything like that, that's a really great PDF to base it off of. And finally, the United Spinal Association created their own version of disability etiquette that is specific to not only their population, but people with mobility disabilities. So if you want to learn more, these are some great resources. And if you would like more than that, you know where to find us. But I'm going to go ahead and put my email up. It's jdevries@mtc-inc.com, and I'll plug it in under the chat. Our number is 1-800-949-4232, and then our office hours are 9 to 4, Monday through Friday. But I do know that we covered a lot in a short amount of time, and so I worked with Carol so that we can have these last 15 minutes to answer more specific questions that you might have if you want to pop them in the chat, or if you want to, go ahead and unmute yourself. I'll be here to answer whatever more specific questions you have. But other than that, thank you guys so much for attending. I really appreciate it. And I do believe Carol has some other important details that she would like to cover. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing, but my email will be in the chat.
So yeah, does anybody have any other questions for Jenny? And you can unmute yourself if you'd like, or pop them in the chat.
Hi, Jenny. This is Ayana.
Hi.
I have a question. You made a really interesting comment earlier that I think can apply in a lot of different realms, including disabilities, a topic that we're talking about today, about equal opportunity but not guaranteed equal outcome. And that really stood out to me. And I just wonder how that applies when it comes to public transit stops that may not be ADA compliant.
Sure. So ADA stops fall under the 2010 standards. So if they're not accessible right now, you have to modify that drop-off location so it is accessible. And then if you're going to alter it in any way, whether it's with curb cuts or anything that will change the structural integrity of that stop, it will automatically fall under the new requirements under 2010. And I'm not an expert on scoping exactly, but as soon as you make alterations to that stop, it automatically has to become accessible when viewed in its entirety. So, you know, without diving into it too much, as long as you can make sure that access to the bus and the bus itself are accessible, those are really great places to start. And if you're looking for more specific information, we have someone who is used to the ins and outs of the standards themselves that could answer it probably more accurately than I can for you right now.
And when you say accessibility, does that like include, like, even if it means that the area does not have structures such as a bench or lighting or shelter?
Well, you know, so here's the thing is I'm not exactly an expert, but I can get you the answer if you would like. So if we can exchange emails, that would be great. But just on a broader definition, when it comes to making something accessible, whether it's a sidewalk or there's no shelter, you have to find a way to make it accessible for that person. So if someone with a disability is getting picked up at that stop and they're struggling with access, you're going to have to modify that area to make it accessible for that person.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. And if you do have more specifics, just drop me your email and I can reach out to you and let you know more scoping requirements and things like that.
Okay, thank you so much.
And just as a reminder, everyone, these evaluations are super important. For me personally, it's great to know what you guys thought, what you would have wished you had learned during this presentation, but I know it's also really important for Carol and her organization. So if you have a phone, all you have to do is hold your phone up to the QR code. And if not, all you have to do go to is surveymonkey.com with the /PWBZNV9. And we would really appreciate that feedback.
And I did put the link in the chat too. It's easier for you guys to copy and paste it out of there or whatever, or go to it. Or anybody else have a question, or do you see something else in the chat, Jenny? Or?
Yeah, Shiloh asked, if you're waiting in line for a restroom, is it considered rude to use the accessible stall if no one is obviously waiting for it because you saw someone get yelled at once for using it? So short answer, no, it's not considered rude. Like I said, if it's a really long line and everyone holds off on that accessible restroom and you happen to be the next person in line and the only stall available is the accessible restroom, you can use it. Again, it's there to ensure equal opportunity for restrooms, but it's not going to guarantee that someone in a wheelchair at the back of the line gets to cut everyone just because they're in a wheelchair and just because there's an accessible restroom. They have to wait in line just like everyone else. But that's a great question. And if someone gets yelled at for it, it's probably because they had like a really bad day, or, you know, if someone in a wheelchair is, you know, they're at the end of their energy for the day, that could have just been that person is the person they snapped at, which is unfortunate, obviously, but it's a reality for a lot of people with disabilities.
So I just want to take a few minutes to remind everybody again about the next Dr. Mack meeting on Tuesday, November 3rd. Oops, looks like I lost a number. It's from 1:30 to 3. And just want to say a special thanks to Jenny and the Rocky Mountain ADA Center. They are great. Jenny, you did a great job today for us, and we appreciate all your expertise and taking the time to share with us. And we also just want to thank all of you for participating. It's good when we can get together and try to learn together, and I think then we're all better for it. So I'm gonna go back to the last slide just so in case you guys look for that evaluation quote again.
Your expertise. Quick question here. We've always, since we're so guest service oriented here in Breckenridge, we don't like to grill people too much. So what our drivers have done a lot of times is, instead of questioning somebody that might have a service animal, they usually say something to the effect of, "I'm sorry, we don't permit any pets on board." Kind of a lead in. Is that bad to say that?
No.
Instead of just, and then, they might say, "This is my service animal," and they might just drop it. The person in past training said that might not be a good way to lead in, but we kind of think that's a friendlier way. If thinking the same, or?
Yeah, well, I would say it depends. So in my mind, from the ADA Center, Jenny's opinion, I would say we don't allow pets. Is this a service, or is this a service animal? Because maybe that person gets anxious in public interactions, and when they're so obviously confronted with something, maybe they shy away. Instead of, being like, well, yes, actually, this is a service animal, they might be like, oh, never mind. So if you can say your no pets policy, that's totally allowed. The ADA doesn't prevent you from saying no pets allowed. But, in terms of trying to make sure that policies aren't discriminatory, just understanding some people might not know their rights, they might not be comfortable in confrontational settings. So that's a suggestion that I could make, is just modifying that policy.
I understand what you're saying. That way it's not as intimidating for the person. All
Exactly.
right, thank you.
Yeah, because I would think you wouldn't want to discourage somebody from accessing transportation, but if you have to ask the service animal question, they might be confronted,
Right, and that's a good balance. We say that only because we do have a lot of people who, they buck the system, and if you ask the question immediately, is that a service animal, they'll just say yes. And a lot of the drivers, who have issues, this is a good way. I think this is I like the verbiage of that. So thank you.